Where the LGBTQ movement is currently, especially in Bay Area or in America, I mean, what's the state of affairs, you think?
I think a lot of people are scared or worried about the future.
It's like Florida is, what is that? Don't say gay policy and, all of this.
All of these things, we're just going backwards. Like, we already have a broken system, and now we're going to make it more rigid.
Yeah, they already came for Roe v. Wade. Now what are they going to come for? Like,
exactly.
Gotta be there. I'm losing my cool. I'm on the edge. Something's taking over me. I'm gonna be down on my knees. You know I'm ready for this. You keep me begging for this.
This is the Ocio Show with Rahul, where I have deep conversations with interesting people on topics that are meaningful, slightly personal, and perhaps controversial.
Roll with this. I could do this all day. I could do this all day. Back up, I'ma run this town. I'm headed for the top and you know it's going down.
Welcome to the Ocio Show with Rahul. We have Liv with us for our photo shoot today, and I'm so excited. It's going to be a personal journey with Liv. So we are shooting in San Francisco, and home of free everything in the world. And so Liv, you have been going through a transition, and that's probably the ultimate transition of all with respect to gender. So what prompted you in this direction?
I mean, I think I always knew, like, in my subconscious what was going on with me, and from a very young age.
Like, how old were you when you felt something,
I
different?
When my parents would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, they would ask me, and I would always say, like, oh, I want to be Britney Spears, or, like, I want to be the Pink Power Ranger.
Yeah.
And they would always, like, tell me, like, you can't do that.
You can't
Like,
do that
you have to
because that's reserved for girls or women or...
Yeah,
Yes.
and they're just like, you have
So
to
you
pick
being
something
born as a
real.
boy, that it did make sense to them at that time.
Yeah, I think I just grew up with, like, very traditional values and, like, in a...
Like most of America, I'm
religious.
guessing.
Yeah.
And where was that? Was that in
In Central Oregon.
Oregon?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were what? Young, 7, 8.
It was probably, like, 6 or 7
Okay.
around then.
And then when did you actually like take the first step in terms of going close to where your heart felt
Totally.
to go?
I feel like it was a lot of little things like that, like just me not responding how people would expect me to respond in such a contrasting way, where it wasn't like, oh, she's weird. It was like, something is off. And like, I always internalized that and really felt that way about myself.
But would they actually refer you as a she growing up as well?
No.
So that was also
I'm just
a new
doing
thing.
that out of respect for myself.
Yes. But at that time, that was probably, you wanted to, but then there was not.
Oh, yeah. I, like, even
case.
in, like, video games, like, making characters, I would always make a female character. And, like, it would give me so much euphoria to be able to, like, live as that person.
Got it.
And, like, there was a lot of, like, dressing up and, like, the typical, like, putting on my mom's heels and everything.
Did your mom know about that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But
We won't tell her.
I would be closed off around them. And I think as a kid, I didn't think about them knowing. I just didn't want them around. And so I'm sure, like, my aunt and uncle or, like, family friends would be like, hey, your kid is, like, really feminine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Or maybe did they just think that you were gay?
Actually, yeah. I think most people did just think I was gay. I grew up in a really small conservative community.
Were there other gay people or trans people where you grew up?
Trans people, I feel like, in the community, like, people use the word stealth. So, like, maybe you, like, identify as trans or, like, you've gotten to that point in your experience, but it's not safe or comfortable for you to, like, express
Yeah, it's like a
yourself.
stealth mode for like a startup. Like you're on a
Exactly.
stealth.
Yeah, and so I think that, like, that's probably a lot more common than people talk about. But I visibly trans or even really queer people were not very common, and they would usually get criticized pretty harshly.
And this is Central Oregon, even though it's like a really blue state, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's the like weird part about it is because Portland is very blue, and I
Yeah.
lived there for 5 years. But before I moved there, like I kind of figured out everywhere else but Portland and Eugene, maybe Salem, that everywhere else
But
is
it's
very
just
red.
very red.
Yeah.
Same as California, probably.
Exactly.
Except for the coastal cities.
Yeah.
So the mentality is slightly different as well, growing in these places. And then, how long did you personally identify as gay?
That's actually like my next point in the journey where it was like I had all of these moments of self-expression where I was like not judged and able to just have that freedom. And it didn't really click for me like as far as labeling or anything like that, or I wasn't like trying to figure it out so much early on. But then once I got into high school and like puberty was very much a thing already, it was really, I don't want to use the word traumatizing, but it was very confusing. Like I remember like staying up really late at night and just like trying to hash it out in my brain, like how I could be the way I'm supposed to be, or just trying to figure things out. And then I started dating this guy in high school, and I took him to prom. And like he was a big secret, nobody knew anything. And then when I took him to prom, everyone was taking our pictures, and so of course that got back to my family. And then at that point I was out. And yeah, I felt a lot of pressure, not just from my family and my parents, but like also my friends at school, where people are trying to like label, because I mean that's what the brain wants to do if you're not conscious of it. So people are like, "Oh, so you're gay?" And no, I don't think that applies to me. And they're like, "No, but you should just be gay. It's simple." Or like,
Yeah, we can understand you better
exactly,
if you're this way.
like we can accept this. Like, but if you're not that, then we don't know how to support you, or we don't know how to. And it
So you
was
think gay people are
complicated.
accepted more than trans people in general?
It really depends on the group that you're talking about. Because I think that some people see queer people or people who don't fit the norm, like there's just a bar and they don't
Yeah,
cross
they
that
don't
bar.
cross that bar. But some people who are bold enough to cross that bar still have these different
Identities.
identities and also preferences, or like
Yes, yeah. And like most people have like they want things to make sense. They want to understand. I think is really what it comes from.
they want to explain it to their kids.
Yeah.
And they themselves don't understand.
And it's complicated because a transition is so personal to an individual. And I feel like that gets lost a lot in a lot of these conversations where it's like, oh, well, you have this next step, or you have to cross this threshold and
Yeah.
do X, Y, and Z to be valid or
Yeah.
to count.
It's not a marathon where you have to run mile 1 to mile 2 to mile 3,
Yeah.
right? So it's okay. So you felt the label gay was not the right one for you when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I remember having a really complicated, like I had those little micro conversations with my classmates and friends, and then I like remember having a big conversation with my parents, and my dad's a pretty intelligent person, like he's very book smart, but he's not very empathetic. And it was really interesting to me how he understood. He's like, okay, you're not gay. And like it was very vulgar and harsh, the like exchange of like, so you're this, and it was very black and white. And then by the end of like us kind of just firing back at each other, he's like, all right, like you're not gay, fine. It doesn't make sense to me, fine. And like it was just easier for him to just step away completely. And then with my mom, it was like she wanted me to tell the truth. Like she just wanted me to admit that I was gay. And so she had a lot harder time with it, I think. And at the time, like I just hit so many walls with them where I was just kind of like, I am not at that point in my personal journey to have these conversations. So sure, I'm gay, whatever. And then after high school, I moved to Portland and I started to meet queer people who weren't stealth and they weren't as discriminated against in that community, and I was able to feel safe exploring those terms and labels for myself. And I started wearing makeup, and I would wear I don't think I felt comfortable wearing dresses, but I would wear like a skirt occasionally, and I wore heels a lot. But then I met a trans woman for the first time, and she still
Where did you
inspires
meet
me.
her?
Well, I
Out
was
and
ready.
about?
I met her through friends. Yeah, they were all going to the beach, and they invited me over to like get ready, and she happened to be there. But as soon as I saw her, I was just like blown away. Like I didn't have any words. There was just
You're like,
kind
that's
of
me. I want to be her.
yeah, like this recognition. And I don't know, I feel like cis people have that where you see someone doing
Yeah, it's like a role model. Hey, I want to be him, or I want to be her, or
but me. Like I want to do that. But
yeah, of
my
course, you
way.
can't be them, but
Yeah.
your version of them.
Yeah, you just like see this little sliver of possibility, like a new timeline or something. And I
So
think
you're still in
yeah.
touch with her. She was your first inspiration.
yeah, and I feel like she was very political and vocal in the like queer community, and she did drag and would host events and shows, and was just very out and using her voice very effectively, I would say. And so I think a lot of people have that experience with her. And so I remember feeling this like pull of like, I want to get to know her. Like, I want to have this personal connection with her. But it was like, we never really became super close friends. And there's like a little bit of age difference. Like, she's a little older than me. And I remember feeling a little weird about that at the time. But now I don't, because everyone's on their own journey. She doesn't owe me anything because she inspired me.
Yeah.
She's already done enough.
Yeah,
But I think that's
it's
really
like,
common.
yeah, I can
You
put
want-
a lot of examples of so many people who was an inspiration, but
Yeah.
they don't know who I am.
And it's a scary experience, too. Like, I remember it took me, like, a few months to really embrace it. And, like, I knew immediately when I saw her, but... yeah, it took me a few months to a year to like start wearing wigs and trying out different things.
Were you also sort of motivated by her activism and
Her tenacity.
So does being different and queer in this world also mean you have to be political, or you have to take some action? Or just people, what if somebody wants to just go about live their life? Or is it not the case because you are going through these oppressions and journeys of yourself that it's only fair that you are standing up for people of your own kind?
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question, and like it's complicated, the answer, I think, because you have to encapsulate and make room for everyone in that conversation. And I think that there are people who they feel that, like, I personally feel like a pull to advocate. And I think part of that comes from meeting this trans woman and being inspired by her. But also, it's a really hard experience, and I think a lot of people face a lot of ugliness in the world directly just from expressing themselves in this way. And so I think it's harsh to be like, I expect you to stand up and use your voice and advocate. I
Because
think
people may not be ready for
Yeah.
something like that.
exactly. And like
So
everyone,
itself is hard to stand up for yourself.
exactly. Like you have struggles. Do you want to be required to
Yeah.
pop off every day? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a little
it's
unrealistic.
personal. Yeah, it's for everybody else. Like, just because I clear an exam doesn't mean that I have to write a book about how to clear that exam.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's a little bit of that analogy too. So you had inspiration. She was the inspiration. Have people told, now that you're on slightly on the other side, have people told you that you are an inspiration to them?
Yeah. Then that's like a weird experience too, because I think the first couple years, especially of my transition, I felt so alone, and I just felt so weird compared to so many people in my circle and in my life and at work. And then like once I started to just like I had to just let that go, because it doesn't serve me. It doesn't push me to reach these heights that I want to reach. So eventually you just forget about it and you shove it down, and then through meeting those other people, you're like, oh, I'm doing that thing
Yeah.
that she did. I am like, I've achieved my goal in
Yeah.
a way.
And did you undergo therapy in any of these transition
Oh, yeah.
periods?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Did that help in general?
Absolutely. It's really interesting, and that's one of like the best things about living here. It's been such a blessing, but
In San Francisco, Bay Area. Okay.
yes. I remember my family always knew something was wrong with me. Like
Yeah,
quote-
we'll do
air
wrong
quotes.
in air quotes.
Exactly. And they, like, my mom would just tell me, like, I've always known you had mental health issues, or I know you have ADHD, and, like, just kind of listing off these diagnoses that she is not
Qualified
qualified
to.
for. And once I started living with my aunt, when things kind of fell apart with my family, she wanted me to be on medication, and she got me a therapist. And I realized, like, the power in that, but I wasn't ready for that experience. It went really poorly, actually. But then through
You mean the medication or the therapy?
both, I was not a good fit for the therapist, and it was not a good fit for the medication. And that totally backfired. But once I started transitioning and going to clinics and advocating for myself and getting the support I needed, it just felt so natural. And there would just be times where I was ready to give up, but like I went to therapy, and all of a sudden, an hour later, I feel completely different. And I've tried other medications too since then, but for me, I think
Yeah.
just therapy is great.
And you mentioned transition. So, I mean, different people have different definitions of transition. What is your definition of transition?
For me, I would say, like, there's the obvious, like, transitioning from one gender to another.
Like physically speaking.
Yeah. And, like, with the hormones and everything, because, like, I personally don't believe that you need to be on hormones to be trans. And I also think that just because you're on hormones doesn't mean that you necessarily identify as a trans person. Like,
Oh, that's interesting because there could be people on hormones. Do you think who don't identify as trans?
yeah, I know a couple.
What do they identify as?
I'm kind of referring to people who identify as non-binary, and maybe they don't feel totally comfortable under the trans umbrella. I think there's space for there for them, where they could, if they identify with being trans, then I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. But also, like, if they are on hormones and they're non-binary and they don't, like, their non-binary identity is more solid than like a trans community or trans identity.
So just for
That's their
viewers, what is the
choice.
difference between non-binary identity and trans identity?
Well,
I mean, according to what you think.
I think that there's like a binary, like inherently binary aspect of transitioning.
Yeah, so male to female, female to male.
Yeah. And a lot of people see it from that scope where it's like this is binary. But non-binary people see gender as more ambiguous.
Yeah, you can have both male and female characteristics in yourself.
And everyone does.
Everybody, it's a
Yeah,
spectrum.
exactly. And I think
Like sexuality too, it's a spectrum.
exactly. And I think like non-binary people, the way that they identify, it's just more personal and trying to eliminate some of these constructs that we've been conditioned to
Yeah,
believe.
these are historical constructs in our society.
Yeah, I mean, today is, I'm pretty sure it's Intersex Awareness Day.
Okay.
Yeah, and so intersex people, just the fact that they exist totally debunks so many anti-trans conversations and arguments.
And these are physically intersex people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And like
Yeah.
I have known intersex people in my family, and like I've known intersex friends, and their perspective is so unique and interesting.
So for the audience benefit, like, what is an intersex person? Is it having two forms of genitalia? Is it one different kind? Like, how do people define these?
I don't think that there's one way that intersex people exist. Like, the body's crazy, biology is crazy.
Yeah.
There are anomalies and
Do you think these are anomalies in
Discrepancies.
nature, or these are, not really anomalies? It
It happens.
if it happens
It's normal.
5% of the time, it's really not an anomaly.
That's true.
If it's 1 in a million, probably. But it still exists, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't define it, fair. But then these are people who bodily, not just mentally, are different sexes and different genders.
Yes, yeah. And I think it really brings me to a point where, like, intersex people really challenge just what a lot of people put, like the hate that people put on the trans community and trans people, where it's like, oh, well, this is the expectation of what a female is and what a male is. But it's totally discrediting the group or the community
intersex, yeah.
that you're talking to, because being trans is so personal, and like no one can tell me what the rules are for transition. I discern that for myself. It's not made up, but like.
But when people
I'm
argue
creating
that
it.
there are rules of being a man or a woman,
I think a
and
lot
they're
of
applying the
people,
same rules to trans, I mean, would that... So then it's not really fair on all the men and women too, right? Like,
Yeah.
because nobody can tell you who a real man is or who a real woman is. I mean, if that
exactly
is extended to
And
that logic.
once you start putting those like rigid guidelines on things, you realize how many people don't meet the mark. A lot of people starting those conversations and being like, well, this is what a man is. And I'm like, based on my definition, I don't know if you're really...
And I think people watching this from certain parts of America or from the world would be thoroughly confused by our conversation right now in terms of, people like rigid rules on these kind of stuff.
The brain does.
Brain does. You're like, hey, it's a black or white. No, it's shades of gray.
Exactly.
Or rainbow. For that
Or
matter,
rainbow
right?
if you want.
So on that front, so we going back to the transition. So what does it mean to you to transition? And I know you have a slightly different opinion about transition than a lot of other people in the community. So yeah, what is
Yeah.
yours?
So
And what is a commonly held belief generally in the
like
community?
common beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hormones, of course, and that's the first step, let's say. Of course, assuming that there are people who are trans who don't take hormones. But in a, let's say the 80% of the cases, right? What is the general journey for people? Just for edification of people.
I'm just thinking about how to answer it because I don't necessarily agree with the question.
Well, in
I
the
also
sense
see what
of,
you mean. Yes.
See, it's a personal journey.
Yeah.
And of course, if there are a million trans people, there could be a million journeys. My hope is through this conversation to illustrate to the vast majority of people, for a majority of the people who think about this stuff, how does it look like? What does it seem like?
I think that it's a tricky conversation to start because it kind of starts building a box, and in a way that's dangerous because we're trying to like paint this image of what being trans is like for people who won't experience that or can't understand. And when you start putting like rigid guidelines or like what it takes to be considered, you're
already
limiting.
limiting it. So which is fair enough because you're already, this is a non-limiting expression as well. But I am trying to cater to somebody who doesn't know what trans means.
Yeah.
Like at all. Like I'm sure they can Google it and find
Totally,
out. But like,
yeah.
But in terms of generally, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. People think about if you're trans. If I say, I mean, you can say I'm wrong. They think about hormone therapy. Then they, at some point, try to think about surgery for changing who they are. And I don't know, live happily ever after, I'm guessing, right? I mean,
I think I can answer now. So like I just did want to like mention, like I do feel like that area of thinking or that conversation,
it's still very limiting.
It's dangerous because the effect that it can have on people who don't fit in that box is very alienating. It's very ostracizing. Like it's just the impact is very harsh, I think. But for me, I met this person who inspired me to start my transition. Then I started to bounce that idea around in my head and off of people who I've known for years and years, like
who are also in this journey, probably.
No,
Oh, like separate. Okay.
Long-term friends who have always supported me, even through my family things and everything. So I'm like, what do you think about this? Because I feel this way, and have you ever seen me? And pretty much all of them were like, I'm not surprised. you've always been a girl to me. And it was just very funny.
These are like other girls or other
Yeah.
guys or
Mostly other girls.
Okay.
Where they're like, you've always been one of the girls.
Yeah.
Like, thank you for telling me finally.
yeah,
You know?
You should have told me long back. But,
Exactly.
yeah.
And
Fair enough.
so that was fun. And I had a lot of support where people are giving me clothes and teaching me how to walk and
Alright.
like the little tips.
Hand me
and-
downs.
Yes, all the little
Okay.
hand-me-downs. And the makeup that I do and the way that my makeup has changed over the past like 5 years, it's all based on like what
Yeah.
I've learned from other trans people.
Was it weird to get hand me downs from guys before and then not later from other girls?
No, because I was an older sibling.
So you never got hand me downs
Yeah.
on this. Okay.
Maybe occasionally from like a family friend
Yeah, yeah.
or something. But it was weird. I kept all my male clothes for a long time and I had a lot of clothes even then.
You still have them or?
Oh no, I had a crush on this guy in my building and I gave all of them to him. I was like, here you
Okay.
go. Here's a whole wardrobe.
All right.
It
Okay.
was
You took
really
it?
weird. Yeah, he did take it all.
Same
But-
size and all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I was like, oh, we're the same build. He's cute.
Yeah.
Here.
All right. Did that result in something? I mean,
No, it
you
did not.
date him or
But,
whatever, but
it felt really good to just get rid of it all.
yeah.
Like
It's also like sometimes, you know, you burn stuff so that's like burning the past
yeah.
as well, right?
And like
so
I'll regret it sometimes because like as I get more comfortable in my femininity, like
you're okay wearing the
I'll wear a t-shirt.
yeah.
Sure, but like
Fair
the
enough.
first couple of years, like putting on that t-shirt, like a graphic tee, it felt so disgusting.
Oh yeah, I hear you because you want to be rooted in something that you believe in because you're still like ambiguous on both sides. Of,
Yeah, like I wanted to be open, but I also
Yeah.
I was very convinced. Like I was like, this is who I am, and I'm not turning back. Like once I
So
make
so
these
going back to
decisions.
the clarification, just for people, like I know this whole normative view of trans person being at some point the ultimate goal being post-op, which is post-operation, is not true, or like it's not fair
I
on a lot of
think-
people who are going through these journeys.
Yeah.
You could be trans in pre-op and be perfectly okay for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I mean that's how I see myself. I don't see myself getting bottom surgery. But around that same time that I gave all my male clothes away, I hadn't started hormones yet, but I knew that I was going to and I wanted to so bad. But I had a roommate who was an older trans woman who had just gotten bottom surgery. And she started showing me these videos, and it wasn't like a trigger warning or like content warning. It was just, here's this video of a surgery. You're going to have to experience this one day, so I need you to watch this with me. And it really rubbed me the wrong way.
But hopefully they have anesthesia and all that, right? It's not
Of course,
like
of course. I mean, I was a mortician. I'm not scared
Yeah,
of gore.
yeah.
But it was the fact that she had assumed so much about my
see,
journey.
I see.
Like, I was just like, why are you telling me which decisions I'm going to make?
But was she regretting that surgery
No.
or?
She was just in her mind, and I do feel like it is something that's more prevalent in older trans community or with like cis identifying
Yeah,
people
yeah.
where they just expect like, oh,
Expect you. Oh, now you're on this journey. I expect you to do X, Y, and Z.
yeah, and there can be a learning curve, especially when you're not open to the ideas. You're like, okay, I'm trying to grapple with this idea of being trans. And then maybe you finally get that blueprint and you build like, okay, so I can understand a trans experience. This person's going to do X, Y, and Z, and they'll have their end goal. But for me, like, I want to always be improving in every aspect of my life. I want to be trying to, like, do better and impress myself. And so I feel like putting that hard stop on, like, once I do this, I've
To
done
the
it.
other one. Yeah, it's a more rebel attitude about your own journey.
Yeah,
you
because-
don't want to be put in a box.
It might be controversial to say, but just because I get a bottom surgery and I do all the things, I get my face changed or whatever, and I start doing vocal training, even if I do everything that I possibly can, it doesn't make me a cis woman. And I
Maybe
feel
that
like,
they want to probably put you into that bucket. Probably that's why a lot of people might be expecting you to do X, Y, and Z in that order.
and I think that like there are a lot of valid arguments there, and there's a lot of like discomfort from people who just don't understand, and that's normal. But it's when you like start treating people like your behavior changes towards individuals and you're basically punishing people for being themselves, that's when it's a problem, I think.
So with all the hormone therapy and all that, did you go through insurance, and was that easy in general when you wanted to do all of this?
Yeah, I was really lucky to live in Oregon when I decided to do this, and so I was able to get hormone replacement therapy relatively quick. And then once I started, I was nervous because there was a lot of like an entry interview and therapy and talking about like testing my levels and everything. Like it was all
But
very
was this
complex
how old were you when
and
this
scientific.
happened?
I was 21.
Okay.
And like I remember just thinking in my head, okay, like I have to do X, Y, and Z. And then there was just certain things like with the bottom surgery where I'm like, I know I'm a trans woman, but I just don't want to do that. And I don't think I have to. Like, who's going to make me?
Yeah, who's going to make you? Yeah. And I think in this day and age, with this lot of, in the politics of this country, there's a lot of things about, even our former president mentioned something like that in one of the rallies. What age should people be allowed or even think about something like this? Like a hormone therapy. What's your view on this?
So that gets a little complicated. I do think that minors getting surgery that isn't it can be life-saving, but I do think that it should be very monitored and controlled. Like I used to not think that way. I used to be very open, like, oh, if they are ready and they know, then power to them. Like I was kind of jealous.
But you gotta get the parents' approval and all that, right?
And
before.
Sometimes they do, and people will transition, and then after a year or two or whatever, they don't align with that identity anymore. And like, there's a lot of identities I had in my mind when I was a teenager that I don't.
Yeah, you don't relate to that anymore
At all.
because your ideas and prefrontal cortex is still being formed, probably all the way up to 25. I think for a lot of people. So you also subscribe to like wait it out a little bit.
I think that waiting is not terrible. If someone's like suffering and that's what they want and their mind is so set on it, I think it's wrong to deprive them of that. But there should be a lot of counseling. There should be a lot of like support and guidance through making those decisions. Because once I felt thrown into it when I started my transition, and I had to meet other trans people over the years who would kind of quash my own limiting beliefs. And eventually, like, I just got to a point where it was like, I can do X, Y, and Z, but I don't have to.
Yeah.
And like maybe it will benefit my transition, but if I don't, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not of less value because I don't.
And with all of this transition journey, how has, I know you mentioned about your parents and relationship. How has that sat with them?
The coming out as gay, I basically just dropped that, and I ended up like getting kicked out of the house and everything and having that whole experience. And then I had started to try and like patch things up with my mom because I grew up and she was like my best friend. And then while I was trying to like fix things with her, I had recently started being more feminine and things. And basically after the main falling out with my parents, I was like, I am totally comfortable with being myself and I'm going to lay out my boundaries and you can engage or not. I don't know. And so then I kind of took this opportunity when I was 21 to like tell my mom, like, yeah, I'm trans. And then it was the whole same thing over and again. It felt like a rerun of like an old show.
So you were reliving the trauma a little bit twice. Are they in a better place where they accept you now, or?
No. But like the second time that I had to come out and it was authentic and I got to choose that for myself, my parents reacted the same, except for with a little less emotion. It was like they were reiterating how they already felt about me because they probably knew.
Which was harder on them, you think?
I do think that coming out as trans, I remember my mom saying, like, you killed my son or something crazy like that. But she said crazy stuff when I was gay, too, so I don't know.
So it was both bad, but relatively trans was harder. How is the people you grew up? I mean, family being one thing, but friends and people you grew up with, has that changed how they look at you now versus what you were before?
I think a lot of my female friends were like so excited and very supportive. A lot of my masculine friends were a little uncomfortable.
These are like cis, straight.
And I feel like even the ones who were really supportive of me being gay and like that didn't bother them, they're like, oh, I know you're going on a date with a guy. Like, just tell me the truth. And it would just be kind of silly and supportive in like a very quiet way where it was like very few words were shared, but I felt support from them. And then when coming out as trans, it was like, yeah, I would love to spend time with you, or I would love to do this, and they wouldn't. And so it kind of made me feel like they were uncomfortable. I don't know to what degree or what that experience was like for them, but I could feel the confusion and unease of, like, I was
So
a
you
new
feel
person.
more sort of, I wouldn't say discriminated, but more hatred from society as a trans person than when you were probably identified as gay.
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it's been difficult in different ways.
Well, on that light, we're going to end this segment and we'll come back after a break for the second segment.
Sounds great.
Well, Liv, welcome back to the second segment of our shoot today. From the gender transition and struggles and triumphs to being in a morgue. You worked in a morgue with dead bodies.
Yeah.
What was it like? Mortifying? No pun intended.
Maybe a little.
So what was your day-to-day job?
So basically, my introduction to death care was being a removal tech. And basically what that entails is just going out to residences or maybe like a community living space or like a old folks home, hospitals. And then like at first I was doing crime scenes, packaging up the body, putting them in the body bag and taking them out in a gurney. A lot of people, they would always ask, oh, so you'd get to drive a hearse? That's pretty cool. But no, at the first job I had, I just drove a black like Ford van, like a mom van.
Like a pickup truck? No, like a van.
Like a van.
A closed van.
Yeah, and they have all the back seats taken out, so it's just the driver and passenger. And in the back, there's usually like some kind of metal floor, like a rack or something with like, sometimes they'll have like little wheels in it so that to help with the movement, but you just collapse the gurney and
this is
put
a
it in.
private service generally, or is it run by the county or city or like a public sort of service?
So there are corporations within death care who run a lot of those in major cities.
Like the cities contract with these private corporations.
But in smaller towns or places where a family-owned company has thrived, it's pretty common to just have it be family-owned, or another avenue, people have started like a third-party just pickup service, and they'll usually charge like around $300 a body.
And these are pickup from homes or pickup from the morgue, from the coroner's?
All of it.
All of it. Okay, so you can pick it up from anywhere.
I went to a lot of
And these are
medical
natural
examiners.
causes or like or
Anything.
So it doesn't matter.
It doesn't
Body's a
matter.
body.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of murder, seen a lot of car accidents.
You have seen a lot of murdered bodies, not a lot of murders.
Well, yeah, murdered
Bodies.
decedents.
Okay.
Yes. It's interesting. There's
I've
a
seen
whole
a lot of murders and not reported them. No.
No. I've never seen a murder. Clarification.
So what's is that? So there are a few other jobs too. One is the embalmer job too.
Yeah.
What did the embalmer do?
Embalmers, when you go to mortuary school, there's kind of a split where you have curriculum based on preparing you to be an arranger and like funeral, like grief counseling and things like that. Funeral
What's an
preparation.
arranger?
They help you make the arrangements for the funeral. So
Is it like an event
an event planner.
planner for funerals?
Yeah. And they really handle a lot of the grief. And like being a removal tech or like being a funeral assistant, I handled a lot of like grief firsthand. But there's a difference between like being in this unstructured environment where grief is just there and you can kind of be a bumper for it. But then when you're an arranger, it's more personal. You're in a small closed room with people who are, you're asking the questions they don't want to answer, really. And so that can be very challenging.
Like what kind of questions?
All the technical questions and asking about how you feel about this and really trying to make sure that the living get their wishes met and that they accurately grieve and honor the decedent. And a lot comes up in that.
Yeah. And then, so this is the arranger, the funeral assistant, and the removal tech, and then the embalmer comes in later.
And so, yeah, so there's like the arranger trajectory, and there's also the embalmer trajectory, which is more like hands-on, less working with people, way more working with the dead.
Dead body. What do? They just embalm the bodies for having it last longer?
Yeah, so the process is basically like if someone wants a traditional burial or if they want a viewing, depending on timing, sometimes you can do a viewing without embalming. And that's usually for people who are being cremated and their family wants to see them quickly. But if you're having any holdups with planning or if they want to be buried, then usually embalming will
How
take
long can you go
place.
without embalming?
It really depends because not everyone's in the same condition. But typically you want to do it as soon as possible, like within the week after. And then after that, it starts to get a little slippery. But the process is usually like the removal tech will bring the body in, then the embalmer, and like I used to assist with the embalming, so like me and the embalmer would just work to declothe the decedent and just like file away the clothes for then, and especially if they're soiled, we're just gonna throw them away. And then after the body is exposed, it doesn't have any jewelry or anything like that. You would just wash them, and then after the washing comes the embalming, and that involves a lot of gruesome
So you have a certain
activities and requirements.
chemical mixture that you add to the body to make it stay.
Yeah, and there are
more-
actually a lot of different types of formaldehyde. I don't know if you knew that. There's a meme online, and it shows a bunch of different formaldehydes, and they come in a bunch of different bright colors. And it's like, what flavor of formaldehyde's your favorite? They just look like fruit juice.
Okay, so for people who don't know about any of this, it's there is. So the embalming can come in various.
Yes, and because
Chemicals.
there's so many different aspects to embalming and so many different conditions that someone can be in when they die, and different conditions that it can occur based on environment
So
after.
it's a science. Somebody needs to know what to embalm you with,
Yes,
basically.
yes, and there's different, like, one of the things I found most fascinating was there's different chemicals that will fix different pigments in the skin. And so if someone's jaundice, like, you'll use a specific chemical to make them a little less yellow. It's
Yeah.
kind of like makeup, but you're pumping it through the body, and it.
Yeah, so you need to know the
It's
chemistry
interesting.
of what happens after you die
Yes.
as well. And for the embalming, can people go to school and learn about all
Oh,
this?
yeah.
And how long will it take to learn all of this stuff?
I'm pretty sure, I haven't looked across all states, but I think for the West Coast, it's pretty typical to go to school for 2 years,
I see.
which is not very long.
And how much does it cost to embalm a body if you're a public person?
I actually don't know the answer to that. I think it really
We'll find out.
varies.
We'll find out in San Francisco what the cost is in the show notes.
It's hard because it can range based on your skill set. Like I've met embalmers who, yes, they can embalm someone. Are they going to do a great job every time? Maybe not. Are they going to do it like within a certain parameter, like time parameters? Probably not. But they're still a great embalmer. They're still going to be able to do really amazing work that's impactful. But then, and that's like, oh, like he's been dead for a week, or like, you know, it's tough. It's tough work. But there's a whole other side of the spectrum where people are like remaking skulls out of clay and like doing a full facial reconstruction.
Because you had a big accident or something. that
Yes, and I've seen some conditions of decedents where it was like,
would pretty bad.
please don't let them see this. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean they're having a funeral, open casket? That's so scary. And then I worked with a really amazing embalmer, and she was just doing some really cool stuff. And there was one decedent in particular where it was a gunshot wound, and it was close range, so her skull fractured a lot. But I remember seeing her, and they were like, her family wants open casket. She was really young. I think she was like 20, early 20s.
Subada?
I think someone shot her over $20. Like she owed someone $20. Yeah. But just seeing her condition and knowing her family's desires and needs and where they were potentially at emotionally, I saw that as impossible. And with my experience, I was just like, someone tell them no. Someone do something, you know? Like I felt very powerless. And then the embalmer that I worked with, she was amazing. She was just like, don't worry. I'm going to ask for your help for a couple things, but I've got this. Like, it's going to be cool. Just wait. And she was very, like, excited. She had so much confidence in herself. And then when that funeral came around, I remember working it, and this girl looked amazing. And the family had made shirts with her face on it. And, like, it was just so important that they got to see her. And, like, her brother brought jewelry and, like, put, like, a gold necklace and, like, a ring on her finger. And it was just so impactful, and they got so much out of that experience. And so I think some people probably would have been like, from my perspective, oh, this is impossible, we can't do this. But it's just so amazing. I was blown away.
They're artists too. You know,
Exactly,
do
it's an
things
art.
like this.
Yeah.
And then how long does an embalming last? Is it forever? Or when you especially bury somebody with that?
That's a hard one to answer, honestly.
Is it like mummified for like 2,000 years or something? Or
I think embalming is pretty effective, but you will still decay. Yeah. It doesn't totally stop.
Yeah.
Natural.
Yeah, and then in some churches and cemeteries, this undertaker job too.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing as
An undertaker is a mortician.
mortician. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just a different name for the
Yeah.
for the same job.
I think undertaker is maybe a little traditional, or it's very like old, or maybe
Yeah.
even
Very English or
English.
Victorian.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember growing up with the name Undertaker, and I was also fascinated with this wrestling star called Undertaker.
Me too. I actually grew up. My dad.
Watching he had a long hair.
Yes, and the eyes.
Yeah, he was tall, and he was
Spooky. Yeah.
I mean, it was all fake, but then,
Of course.
you know.
But
So what's
yeah.
a funny morgue story?
Funny
that you
more.
have?
Oh, I have a really. It's funny to me, but
Well,
it's
yeah, in
inappropriate.
good spirits. Funny. I mean,
Of
death
course,
is death
of
is
course.
very hard on the people who they leave. Finding lightheartedness in the most gruesome places is a hallmark of human ingenuity.
It's an
so-
art as well.
Yeah. So well, tell me a funny morgue story.
This one's inappropriate, but I do think it's the best.
We already
one.
have the warning going on the.
Perfect.
Sure.
I get this call, and it was probably one of the weirdest calls I'd been on, because someone had died on a cruise ship, and the ship wasn't even. I don't think they were supposed to dock in Seattle, or if they were, it was changed because someone had died, and so they pulled up the whole cruise ship, and it was huge. And we like go beside it and park and everything. And we're on a loading dock, so there's just so much activity, so much traffic, and trying to figure things out. And they told us we had to wait because they had to offload everyone on the ship and like get all the passengers off so no one saw what happened. And the person had cardiac arrest, and he was an older gentleman. I remember while we were like killing time and waiting for the other passengers to kind of get shuttled off, I'm kind of curious. And so I was like looking around for points of contact and just seeing what else I could do in the interim. And I found his wife, and I knew it was her immediately because she was so distraught. And I wanted to talk to her, but because of her emotional state, I observed her for like a minute or two, and ultimately I was like, now is not the time. I could not help her, so I'm not even going to engage. And she looked so sweet, and she was like an older woman with like, I don't know, really felt for her. But we ended up doing the removal, going to the ship morgue, and getting this decedent out of there. And he was a very large man, and so it was kind of difficult. And then I remember we got him back to the funeral home that I was like working at, and we had him in the prep room. I was with that embalmer I mentioned, and we're just kind of talking, and she looks over and she sees him, and he's naked.
Yeah.
And
she comes with you.
no,
Oh, you're the embalmer.
The embalmer.
Ah, okay.
Yes. And
Got
so
it.
she looks over and she sees him naked, and she's like, "You wanna hear something funny?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do." She's like, "It's about that guy. His wife called." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I saw her. Like, how was she?" She was really upset, obviously. And embalmer friend, coworker, she was like, "Oh, she's fine. She was great." She actually, I was talking to her about it, and like trying to get her, just kind of get her state of mind, like cataloged, and just kind of like feeling her out, and trying to give her some updates. And one of the things that my coworker said, she was like, "Oh, he's a big man. Like, it was kind of difficult getting him back here, but we took care of him. He's totally all right." And this woman, she says, "Oh, my Edward, he was big everywhere, if you know what I mean." I was like, "Ma'am." So extra.
TMI.
TMI. And also, it's like, we have to work around his naked body for like the week or so.
But is it true that when
Ma'am.
you get these dead bodies, they get an erection?
I
mean, for men.
So I've never seen someone who got an erection post-mortem.
That would be so weird if I was in that room doing some
If you have an
embalming
erection
or something.
when you die,
Then you keep it?
the blood,
the
your
blood doesn't
stops
flow
flowing,
anywhere?
so
Oh,
it
you're right.
coagulates, and well,
Wow.
I don't
That'd
think.
be a great death,
Can I tell a story?
Yes.
So there was this one call, and it was a double, not a homicide or anything, but it was like a double death. And we get there, and the wife is dead on the patio steps. She was running in to get help, and she had a heart attack. And her husband was in like the garage off of the house. He also had a heart attack, but he had the biggest smile on his face, and he was surrounded by pornography, and his pants were down and everything.
Oh, wow. So he was watching porn or
Like looking
they
at
were having
magazines.
sex or
no,
like-
I think it was his own private time, and
wow,
she went and
okay.
found him and was shocked, and the shock caused her
wow.
to die as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was very
Ooh,
weird.
That was, I don't know what to make of that, but
It's weird.
Okay, so then I'm sure you have. So this is a funny story. What's been the most sort of? I call it like, because you're like, I'm so glad I'm doing this job at that time. Like fulfilling story in this
Yeah.
morgue life that you had.
I did have a lot of interactions with families, especially like hosting funerals. When I worked in Seattle, and I worked at a funeral home in Seattle, I lived there, we serviced a lot of people in the community. So in the neighborhood we were in, it was a lot of Vietnamese families and a lot of Eritrean families. And so interacting with other cultures got to be really fascinating, and I loved that. But I would start to see people at like regularly at certain funerals because they were like a big community figure or like something like that. And once I started to see them more often, they would like build kind of a rapport. And I remember there was this one like Vietnamese woman, and she would always call me Julia Roberts, just
Okay.
Julia.
I can see that. I can see Julia Roberts.
But she would always just be at the funeral like, "Hi, Julia." And I'm like, "Yes, my bestie is here." She would always bring me banh mi because they always had banh mi at the Vietnamese funerals. And I remember she would bring me banh mi after banh mi. Like, she wanted to make me fat. I don't know. And another really cute thing I experienced was the monks coming in and doing the chants and everything. And
These are like Buddhist funerals or
sometimes
Christian or
sometimes we'd have Vietnamese Catholics. Like, there was a big community there, but there was also like a big Buddhist community. And that's when the monks would come usually. And the monks were so cute because I was in Seattle, so it's like rainy and cold, and the monks always wear like the orange robes or like the kind of
Ochre
tangerine robes. And in Seattle, when on a cold day, they would have matching little beanies for their bald heads. I thought it was so cute.
Have you done funerals like Islamic funerals or like Hindu funerals or?
No, I really got the chance to do mostly like Vietnamese, Filipino, Eritrean, and those were really the three main. But I really I serviced a lot of different people.
Well, we'll end this segment by talking about what are some things that you learned in this phase of your life that you take to your heart for the rest of your life.
I think it made me grow up, even though like I was on my own as a teenager, like early on, and even before that, like my parents are like alcoholics, or they were when I was growing up, and they weren't very present. Even when they were around and like being active, like they weren't checked into raising children. And I have younger siblings, so I was kind of always the one to take care of them and everything. And so I felt like a pressure to grow up, but also like I'm a kid. Like I have this like undying like energy in me where I want to be a kid too. And so like I feel like I had a hard time like integrating that in a way that lets me also be mature and like lets me also do things. And I think
How did working in a morgue help you with that particular?
it made it difficult for me to express like my childlike side or like my inner child. But I would have to reach for that more because it needed more attention all of a sudden, you know? And so,
Dealing with death and bodies is adults' business, not really kids' business. So
exactly. And I think that really stirred a lot for me where it was like, oh, I'm like kind of in the mix of this weird fluidity of like, I need to be professional, I need to be mature, I need to have all my like boxes checked. And then this sense of, okay, but if I get too caught up, I'm going to be miserable and I'm not going to be able to provide the care that I need to provide to these people. And so it was like trying to keep a balance, really. And I struggled with that a lot before being a mortician, but I feel like being a mortician gave me like a backbone and a little bit of like realness of, like social media is a thing and like everyone's constantly like getting propaganda or like getting manipulated by ads and things, and that can just be so convoluted and weird. And then you like are at a funeral and suddenly everything's real.
It's working closely with death. I consider some of the greatest gifts because you're every day aware of your own mortality.
Exactly.
You may not live the next moment.
Exactly.
And you just have to make the most out of life, is how I would.
Yes, it was very
about it.
inspiring to like really show up for myself and people that I'm around and interacting with and people I care about. And it's weird to me because It was very humbling, but it's also really hard to share that experience with other people. It's easier when I like feel comfortable or if I have like rapport with someone, but like when I was a mortician and I would go on dates, they would always be like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" Like, "Oh,
Let
I'm a
me tell you
mortician."
all about this.
And I
Well,
remember
check please.
I had one guy. I was like out at a club with friends dancing, and I would always go dancing with this couple I was friends with, and so they would sometimes break off and have their like couple dance
Yeah.
moment or whatever. And I remember sitting by myself, and I'd had like a pretty dark week at work, and so I was just kind of like, I'm a mortician at a club. Like this is this is so off. But I was sitting and this guy came up to me. He was like attractive and charming, and he's like kind of like asking me questions or whatever, and I don't know. I was not super open to it, but then like we started to talk more, and then he's like, "Oh, what do you do? Like you're so interesting." I'm like, "Oh, I'm a mortician." And I remember him just like getting up and he scooted like a whole seat away from me. He's like, "Oh."
Awkward.
Conversation over. Like, it was so funny, but
Well, I'm really appreciative of you opening up your morgue life, and
Yeah.
that brings us to the end of that segment, and we'll come back after a short break. Well, Liv, welcome to our final segment from your journey of transition, gender transition, to working in a morgue. You also were homeless.
yeah.
Is there a connection to your gender transition and being homeless? And is that what happened, and
Yeah.
what precipitated?
I think that like that the two for me are very intertwined, because I mean I started being homeless for the first time when I was a teenager. I basically like
But that by
lost
choice, or
everything.
was that being kicked out?
My
or
parents kicked me out, and it
were you
based
18?
no, but it really revolved around my identity and like me not aligning with their values, quote unquote. Everything really fell apart for me, and I kind of lost every sense of support I had.
But where did you live, and like what was like? How were you going to school, or?
I did go to school still, and it was really embarrassing because my hygiene was not always the best.
But where did you live? Like was it with friends, or was just
I started
hopping
off.
around?
Reality was not real to me, obviously, and I was in shock of like what I don't know what I'm doing, and I had a friend who would let me stay with her, but it was more just like her hanging out with her friend. Like it wasn't. I don't think she really grappled with like how much support I really needed, and I don't know if she was available for that as a
Yep.
teenager herself, and so like.
But at least he gave you a space.
Yes, and I'm so grateful for that. But I think I had it in my mind, like, well, I'm just going to go live with her, and this is my new life. And it was like, no, you could stay the night here, but you can't, like, live here. And so
But she was staying with her parents?
and so I started trying to stay with friends when I could. But I mostly, I had a big backpack. I, like, won it in a like little running competition when I was a kid, and I remember getting it, and I was in first grade, and the backpack was bigger than me, and I kept it through all the years. And then when I was homeless, I have that backpack, and I would just put a couple blankets and a pillow in there, and then I would just try to hang out with people for as long in the day as I could, and then once night came and everyone went home, I would just go to a park and like go to the top of the play structure and just like make a bed. And then I did that for a long time, like months, and then
Or was it raining, or?
it would rain. I don't know. If
And
the
did you
sprinklers
see other
turned
people
on,
doing something like this, or was it unique to your situation?
I didn't know anyone else doing that, but I knew that there were other.
This was in
homeless kids.
Seattle, or back in hometown, your hometown?
It was in Central Oregon. Yeah, and I remember that it became normal to me, and a part of me was like, when does this end? Like, there has to be some kind of solution. Like I'm really young, like I have my whole life ahead of me.
But couldn't you like go to like social services or something if you were not of age and just get a support?
I don't think that there was support like that. And if there was, I had no idea how to find it. And so I remember one day someone woke me up, and I was really confused because I was just like, okay, what's happening? Like, why are people waking me up? And it was my friend with her mom, and I had told her what I'd been doing and how I'd been living and everything. And she told her mom, and they showed up and came and got me one morning, and they let me live with them. And from there,
That's nice of them.
It was amazing.
Yeah. How long did you live there?
Not very long. I had a lot of addiction issues, like living with her and her parents. And I remember they kicked me out because I had tarot cards in the house. They were like, "Oh, you're bringing the devil into our home." They're very religious.
So they're very Christian.
Yes, and so after that, I wasn't allowed to be there anymore. And then I started living at trap houses, being around a lot of shady people, and
What's a trap house?
it's basically a place where people sell drugs and do drugs.
These are like empty, abandoned buildings. Or
No,
something?
people live there. It was their house. Like, the one that I stayed at the most, it was like, the mom. She was a single mom, and she had addiction issues. And then her kids grew up in the environment. They developed addiction issues and were constantly in and out of jail, and it just became this thing that was too big for any of them to fix themselves. And I ended up falling into that circle, and I would do a lot of things that I would not do now for survival, like to try and kill time, just trying to pass time, just trying to...
and you were going to school at the same time? Mm-hmm. High school?
Yeah. And I graduated. I remember going to graduate, and I showed up, and people were like, "Why are you here?" So I was like, "I'm graduating, girl." Like, same as you, girl. Yeah, and that was really hard, and it was probably one of the hardest chapters of my life because I just didn't know what to do. I didn't have any...
Well, as a child, I mean, you're a child still. The emotional and physical security is important, and if you don't have that...
Yeah.
No, I have a daughter. I can't imagine she being homeless forever. But it's a reality that people, especially child homelessness too.
Yeah. And I felt a lot of guilt because I mean, I had dreams. I still have dreams. They're the same, actually. But I knew that there was more for me, and I knew I couldn't live like that forever. And I was damaging myself severely, like mentally and emotionally and physically, like every day. And so I started to work. I got an excavation job, and I started to do excavation, and I was able to get off drugs. And after making enough money and, like, I got a car, I was able to move to Portland, and I moved in with, like, my close friend. I've known her, like, my whole entire life, and we were roommates. And then I didn't get along with her boyfriend, who was also a roommate, and I ended up just deciding, like, I'm going to leave. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going. And I impulsively moved in with someone who also had substance abuse issues, and I very quickly, within like a couple days, was like, I can't live here either. This is not safe. I don't want to go back to my old life. And so I didn't really choose to be homeless, but that was my option, and that was what I knew, and I didn't trust people. And so I bought a tent, and I met a homeless guy who I had kind of known, and he was a past coworker of mine, and I knew he was homeless, and so I contacted him and found him and was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be homeless here, and I need help. I don't know what I'm doing." And so he was able to kind of show me the ropes per se. And
so, how do you be a good homeless person? Like, in what's the not resources, but how do you survive?
Trying to find peace is very important, and creating peace for yourself, and making sure that you don't condemn society completely. Like, of course, there are things in society that, like, are just broken, in my opinion. But humanity, like your faith in humanity, like that is really what got me through a lot of it. And just like sometimes I would lose it and I would really just want to give up so bad. And then somebody random on the street would be like, "Hey, I like your hair," or whatever. And even though I thought I looked like a disaster, like it meant the world to me that someone even said anything to me because I felt like nobody.
Nobody cared.
I didn't think that anyone should care. Like based on my mindset then and my view of the world, I just
So you're like, I'm despicable because I'm doing all these
yeah.
things that society does not appreciate.
And I had so much shame. Yeah. And but then it was like in those few moments where I was just like, there's light everywhere. Like I don't need to be so just like in the gutter all the time. And slowly, like through help from that past coworker that was also homeless with me, like we ended up just like kind of hiking a couple miles out of the city, and we were like kind of in the woods, and it was peaceful. It was kind of like being Snow White. Like I would wake up to the birds and I would go to sleep to the crickets.
Back to the
and
nature.
It felt
where
good
would
in a
you
way.
where would you like, if a homeless person, like go to take a bath or like go to the restroom or like all of that stuff, huh?
I would be really lucky if I got to shower at a friend's house. And that really meant so much to me. It's just like, can I just take a shower? And I remember feeling so like
Bad
ashamed and
asking
weird.
people.
Yeah, and the response was always, of course. Are you kidding? Like, please, go ahead.
Yeah.
But like I was so ashamed of that, and like I really like let my image go, and it was hard because I had just started hormones right before this, and so I was like trying to keep up on my pills, trying to keep up on my doctor's appointments, and I'm just living in this tent, and we'd have to walk 2 miles into town every day, and we had like a routine of like, okay, so we need to gather resources. I never asked anyone for money. I didn't have to pay rent or anything, so it wasn't like I needed money.
But how did you manage food and water and all that?
I would just eat what people gave me. Or like if I was able to go to food banks, I would get enough.
This was in Seattle
some
or
food.
Portland?
In
or-
Portland.
And there was enough food banks that were giving out stuff.
Yeah.
San Francisco is great that way in terms of there's
San
so many
Francisco is
resources,
incredible. Yeah. Like
To the point that the people are like, "Are you encouraging homeless people?" Like it's but that's a different discussion.
That's
but
yeah, I it's hard for me to speak on that.
yeah,
But I had this whole like rough experience and like reconnecting with nature and everything, and like just being kind of punk in Portland, which is like kind of part of the, like being in Portland. A lot of people feel aligned with that. But yeah, I was able to
Portlandia vibe with people think Portland is.
Yeah. And I'd worked all kinds of jobs and like nothing ever really stuck, especially when I was trying to be more fluid in my gender. I got a lot of pushback from like employers and like
Like, you don't want somebody like you at job and you
and I
want-
remember like comments like especially around Halloween, like the day after Halloween, like I still am like wearing a wig or something. People are like, "Oh, isn't Halloween over?" and everything. I'm like, "Oh, well."
like passive aggressive.
Yeah, and I remember that first Halloween, my first year of transition. It was like one of the first times that I was like presenting as myself in public, and people were like, "Oh, what's your costume?" I'm like, "I'm me. I get to be me for the first time," and like I remember that being really cool. I was really trying to find my identity and creating who I am and everything, and then I worked at a Safeway deli, and I met this guy, and it was really weird. Like as soon as I met him, like I knew he was gonna be important in my life. And we ended up dating for like a few years. He really helped me, like just supported me and helped me get back to kind of a neutral ground. And then from there, I took my first mortician job, and the company fell apart. And I really got into it because of COVID. I mean, like people were dying and everything. And like COVID really changed my perspective of being homeless and things where it's like, oh, this can happen to anyone. Like we are all just degrees away from people who we see on the street. And I went from that to like trying to talk about like adopting kids and things with this guy. So being a mortician didn't really align with that anymore because I don't think that it's really appropriate for children always. I think that you can work around that, but I didn't want to. That sounded like a lot. I wanted to focus on being a parent. And so I went to massage school, and that was really cool because I got a lot of exposure in like anatomy and pathology, and was able to like continue my mortician education in that way. And then we broke up, and I was really like destroyed. I was devastated, and so I
So it was like love of your life or something like that.
I don't
Or at
think
least
so.
you thought
I
so at
wanted
that
it to
time.
be.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be really bad, and I had this whole 5-year plan. Like I'm a very 5-year plan type of person, and once that all just like was not realistic anymore, I kind of just prepared myself to leave because I didn't want to be in Portland anymore, and it felt mentally draining to be there. And it's small enough that I would run into him and everything, all that. And so I'd lived there for 5 years and decided to move to Seattle. And I went to Seattle and I met a photographer, and he started taking pictures of me, and I was like modeling, and I felt like a whole like revival, like a rebirth, where I was like, I feel so good about myself, and like this person is like helping me like be artistic and like also like see my own worth, and it was a really cool experience. I really bonded with that person, and then I decided to make the move, and I had a house in Portland. Like I had a room at a house, and I was living in Seattle like half time and staying with this photographer when I could. But then I got robbed while I was in Seattle. Someone took my purse, and I didn't have an ID. I didn't have any money, and I was able to like get the money for a train ticket back to Portland, and they wouldn't let me on the train because I didn't have an ID. And so I was stuck in Seattle. I couldn't get back. I couldn't rely on this photographer because in his mind he's like, "Oh, I said you could like stay with me for a week or two, and that's up. Like, you need to do something else. You need to go back home." And he didn't really understand the situation, I think. And so I ended up being homeless in Seattle, and it was really crazy to me how different it was because even like the 2 years that I did live in Seattle, and when I eventually got my new mortician job and I had housing and everything, healthcare was almost impossible to navigate. Like I couldn't get my hormones. I couldn't even get like a general practitioner.
Is
Like
it because you didn't have ID, or was it more like Washington
because I got
politics?
my ID. It was just the structure of how support.
State policies and all.
Yeah, state
Even though it's a
policies
very
and-
blue state, I think.
Yeah. But the support network was not the same. At least I didn't experience it that way.
Compared to San Francisco or
Even
California.
Portland, like Portland had a lot more support, I think, for homeless or like trans individuals. I really leaned on being a mortician once I like found that I got that groove, and that totally took over. I didn't need as much support, but I needed my hormones. I needed to figure all of that out. And then once I got burned out on living at the funeral home, it was just really taxing. And then I decided to leave, and I was like, I don't want to be a mortician right now. Or if I want to be a mortician, I need to live somewhere sunny. And I just can't do the rain anymore. And I have a friend who lives in San Francisco, and we were roommates in 2020, and he moved shortly after when COVID hit. He moved to San Francisco to be with family and friends, and so he'd always been bugging me like, you have to come here, it's way better, you'll love it. And once I made that transition, I like went on a little road trip for a month and just explored, and came to the conclusion like I want to go to San Francisco.
All right.
Like when I was a teenager and I was homeless, I actually went on a trip here by myself and like stayed with a random person I met online and everything. And so I loved it. That experience was one of the best weeks of my life. And so I wanted to come here so bad. I always just felt a call to come back.
So San Francisco, but were you homeless in San Francisco?
Yeah. I moved here with like the idea that like I was going to be able to like stay with some friends, and there's going to be all this support and everything. And like I did get a lot of support, but I think like the timing was a little off for whatever reason. And I wasn't in extreme emergency or crisis, because it was more of a choice that I moved here, you know? And so I didn't qualify for a lot of programs, or like certain shelters and things were full. And so I would just basically, because I'm a massage therapist, I would do like freelance massage work and try to just make enough money to afford my Airbnbs for like the week or whatever, and was able to like make that work mostly. I think I slept outside once.
Where was it easiest and hardest to be homeless among all the places you've been?
I think Seattle was the hardest. It was really scary to be homeless there. And I like got contact high on fentanyl, like people just doing fentanyl next to me, and I was just naive and not aware of what was going on, and people trying to like, in Seattle there's a main strip, like a main drag, called Aurora Avenue, and it's kind of like Skid Row in LA, but it's more just like, it's called a Blade, and it's like pimps and sex workers and just a whole like underground community. And people would like take me out there and be like, okay, you're gonna work, like you're gonna make money for me. I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, you're so crazy. Take me back. Drop me off downtown. Like, we're not doing this. And like, it was just very scary. A guy tried to kidnap me. That was really scary. Yeah, like it just felt so dangerous to be homeless there.
Yeah.
And then here, I think it's also dangerous, but the sense of community and support that I've found here is like unmatched. Totally unmatched for me. And
Even compared to Portland.
or Seattle, yeah. And like I immediately was able to go to a clinic who, within like 3 days, I had hormones, and I had struggled for 2 years to figure out a regular supply of hormones. And so 3 days, like a 2-year issue is totally gone. And so I had so much faith and like hope and like things getting better. And then the friends that I came to stay with, they happened to move out shortly after me moving here.
Yeah.
And so we just got an apartment together.
What do you, I mean, this is a hotbed election issue, this November elections, even the mayoral election, and probably even general election, like presidential election, on San Francisco homelessness and encampments and open air drug markets. And
Yeah.
what's your take on some of this stuff that's happening in San Francisco, where people are saying San Francisco is going to the dogs?
Yeah. I think that there's nothing wrong with wanting to help homeless people, but there are certain things that are enabling. Like, I don't personally agree with giving out glass drug paraphernalia. Like, I think that that's not a necessity, and it's also like not safe, because you know there's just going to be broken glass everywhere.
So what do people do? They give glasses?
Some people give out like glass pipes, and they've been kind of going back and forth with it at certain places lately. But they also will do like the needle exchange, or like the needle like handout, and that one I do agree with a little more. I think that there should be like a service. I've seen them actually around Seattle or San Francisco, where they'll go around with like the little grabber and they'll pick
At
up.
least you're not sharing needles and...
There's so much danger and risk, especially being like with my training in like pathology and being a mortician. Like, it just makes sense for there to be a way to get clean needles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause if you're anyway going to do it, you might as well do it cleanly, sort of concept.
Yeah,
on
it's
this.
just it's so dangerous. It's already something that's so bad for you, but then the risks of like infection or like getting some kind of disease, it's very likely.
Yeah. My little research is the different kinds of homelessness.
That too.
And then
Yeah.
what do you generally, when you were in that position, what have you seen? Is it people voluntarily choosing to be homeless, or on drugs and being homeless, or just, I know, met a guy, my previous job, corporate job, he became homeless because it was a monetary issue, not because of anything else. He was just
Yeah.
saving up. Yeah, I mean, what's generally, is it mostly to do with drugs, generally, in your opinion, or I mean, based on the people you've seen and hung out with and all that.
I would say for someone's first experience being homeless, I think that drugs fill a certain percentage of that, but I wouldn't say that drugs are like what make people homeless initially. I think drugs are more of a byproduct of
Once you become homeless, then you see other people having drugs. So then you're like, I'm sad. Let me have some drugs. Maybe I'll feel better.
it's even more than that, I think, because my exposure to drugs, like hard drugs, was being around people who were doing them, and there was no communication. It was like, oh, suddenly you're in this dangerous situation, and people are doing drugs around you, and I didn't feel like I could leave. I didn't have anyone I could call and come get me, and like people are just doing drugs around me, and I like opted to not do any drugs, and then I started to feel a certain way. I go to the bathroom and I look jacked up, and then I come back and I'm like, okay, like let me do the drugs. They're like, but you never do this. I'm like, I'm already high. Like you already got me high, and so like I just kind of didn't have the wherewithal to be like, okay, let's never do this again. It was like I have nothing.
You're sort of the sum
stopping
total
me.
of the 5 people you hang out with, technically. I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of the angle on this as
In
well.
a way, yeah, that's also like important. And like when you're thrown into that environment and that's who that's your support. It's really hard to have strict boundaries of like I'm not gonna
Yeah, because it's very
partake.
tempting too. It's just so easy.
Yeah, and then for me, once I started doing drugs as a teenager, and I didn't have a savings, I didn't have financial support, I didn't have anything really. Getting food was really hard to think about because I was gonna have to rely on someone, or no, I was just gonna have to rely on someone, and so I would do drugs because I wouldn't be hungry. I'm gonna be fine. I'm just gonna be on drugs for 3 days, and then I'll sleep for like a whole day, and hopefully someone gives me something to eat. And I just didn't really care what happened to me. Like I was really just going through the motions, just hoping the day would go by. And it didn't start like that at all. Like, yeah, and it was really, I don't know, it's hard to see.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people who end up in that environment and they don't have the tools or
They
the
don't have the
protection.
tools and mental capacity to do it themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we talked about Portland a little bit, and I know we previously talked about Portland, and it's not what it seems like sometimes, because if people have this notion of Portland being from Portlandia and these weird and quirky.
It's
and
indie.
Yeah,
It's
people grow their
cute.
own food, and people have
Yeah.
these. But that was probably not your entire experience. People, I mean,
Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
a little bit of that, but is it very welcoming, accepting, you think, or in your personal journey?
I think that the space for people to be themselves and live freely is there. And there's a lot of like support and like community per se. But I personally didn't feel super connected to a lot of like the community there. Or maybe it just wasn't for me. I mean, clearly I'm here now, but I found it really hard to connect with people there. And like, I think like
Is it some of the homophobia or racism, or I don't know, like any
I feel like it was really like
acceptance?
the big fish in a small pond attitude, because it's a small city. A lot of people like get ahead or they get an ego, and then all of a sudden like community is not a priority. It's being that bitch or like
So San Francisco, you think, is different that way, and
a little. I think that there's cliques here, but there's a lot more like commingling, because like I have like 3 main friend groups right now where like I can like kind of bounce between them, and they can interact with each other, and it feels natural and it feels supportive.
How do you feel where the LGBTQ movement is currently, especially in Bay Area or in America? I mean, what's the state of affairs, you think?
I think a lot of people are scared or worried about the
Or
future.
about the presidential election and
Yeah.
the outcomes and all of that.
Yeah. And I think there's
How much of that
a
is
lot
real versus,
anxiety.
real,
Well, there.
you know,
Who am I to
fake.
say? Who am
Yeah.
I to say? But also, I think that like the concern is there. It's real.
It's like Florida is, what is that? Don't say gay policy and, all of this.
All of these things, like
Yeah.
we're just going backwards. Like we already have a broken system, and now we're gonna make it more rigid.
Yeah, they already
and-
came for Roe v. Wade. Now what are they going to come for? Like
exactly. Yeah, and like the
the
just
same-sex marriages and all of that, probably.
yeah, or like policing people's transition. Like there's so many people in the country, I think, who are so comfortable like telling people how to live, and it's just very
Yeah.
sad.
Like, I don't know, people like to mind other people's business, I'm guessing, right? So on these kind
Yeah.
of stuff. It's just
I like how you said that.
but I think being homeless, and there's an intersection of, you're an artist as well.
Yeah.
So there's artists who are queer and homeless. Is one a function of the other, or is it just happenstance, or is just you just happen to know a lot of them, or
For me, like the queer people who I did end up like really relating to were people with similar lived experience. So it's like people who don't feel connected to their family or people who have experienced homelessness. And a lot of them did tend to be more focused on art or more focused on like making their life beautiful or like just creating and creating. And I think like it's really like just breathing new life into like feeling like you're discarded or feeling like you're at a dead end. Like it's like rewriting the narrative.
yeah, using that sad things life gave you, and it's almost like using that lemon and making a lemonade out
Exactly. Like you could get worse or you could
You could get you
see
could
a way
get
out.
even on this.
Even if you can't see it, you'll find it.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And who are some of your favorite artists that you enjoy?
I met a lot of really cool models and photographers in Seattle, and I really loved that community. Just doing a lot of like different alternative shoots, like a lot of concept things. Like one of my friends recently, she did a shoot of her painted up like a gargoyle, and they like did a nighttime shoot in a rose garden. It was so cool. And I think also another interesting subset of like queer artists or like DJs. This is like a pretty like common class, I guess, where like just finding some kind of beauty and like really establishing your self-worth, because like it's so easy to feel like you're not worth anything when you're homeless. And I feel like the like pull to like prove like, no, I am bringing things to the table. I am valuable. I am like a creator. Like I can like make my life mean something. I think that that inner push really like is set off by all of the
Yeah.
ugliness.
You have other hobbies like knitting, and I mean, how did you get into that?
Well, like my grandma taught me how to sew, and I've never really agreed with like fast fashion or anything like that. And I think upcycling and making your own clothes is very good for the environment and just
What's
gives
the
you
most
your
fun
own
thing
flair.
you've knitted or sewn?
Right now, I'm making like a purple suede jacket, and it's kind of like a leather jacket fit, but it's purple suede. I'm just like putting chains on it and using like fur and stuff in the pockets and trying to make it nice. It's been like a big project.
Well, as we come to the tad end of this conversation, what are some of your spiritual beliefs and practices, and is there something that you want to share there?
Yeah. Well, I grew up like born again Christian, and my parents were very much like, I think it was because of the ambiguity of my identity, where they're like, you need to go to church. And so like I grew up pretty
Amen.
religious. Yeah, amen. Oh my gosh. I grew up like with a lot of like religious dogma and like just different ideals of like, oh, you have to do this or you're condemned. Like you have to align or you just aren't worthy.
Were they excommunicated from the church because you went in a certain direction?
No, but my pastor did tell me, he like pulled me aside when everyone found out, and he was like, so we don't hate you, because you're gay, but we are going to change you. And that was the last day I ever went there. I was like, no, you're not. Bye, girl. But from there, that experience specifically, because I really did like church. I came to really like it. I love singing, and so music is probably my biggest outlet. And being in the worship team and everything like that really gave me life. And then, like, I started going to, like, concerts with my bestie, and it's like, oh, you can have this experience at a rock concert. It's just, like, the global unconsciousness of, like, experiencing art together and sharing that and, like, having some kind of divinity. And so I kind of took that idea and started learning about different religions, like Buddhism, and, like, came across, like, the chakra system and started really, like, the chakra system really aligns with me. Like, it just makes sense to me. And I really am sensitive to energies. And
Do you practice like voodoo or some of the energy healing stuff?
I've done a couple voodoo rituals with, like, a friend of color. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing voodoo myself,
Do you have
but
these
my
voodoo
friend was
dolls that you...
no. My friend was really interested in it, though. He's like, with my heritage and everything, like, I want to do voodoo, and he knew that I had done rituals and things, and so it's like, okay, I have a book. Like, we can figure it out.
Right.
It was kind of interesting. I actually, at this point in my, like, practice of, like, magic, I'll just have ChatGPT write my rituals for me.
All right.
It's kind of
That's
corny.
cheating.
It's cheating. But, like, if you tweak it and you put your own personal flair, it's
Okay.
just as effective, I
Yeah,
think.
I think ChatGPT makes everything all right.
Yeah. And, like, my mind is kind of messy, so it helps me structure it, and then I can kind of take it from there, like a blueprint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think, maybe AI is going to fix homelessness. I don't know.
I don't know. That'd be nice, right?
Let's wait and see.
But I really feel like we're all connected to, like, source energy, and that's like kind of my core belief is, like, we all come from the same thing.
Yeah.
And, like, there's a global unconscious, like, metaphysics. I really value metaphysics and just the idea that, like, trees, roots, like, we're all connected, or like mushrooms, mycelium, like, we all have, like, this ethereal connection to each other. And I've experienced actually one of the weirdest, like, one of the first times where I was like, oh, this is real. Like, this is legit. I was, like, singing a song in my head, and I was with one of my close friends at the time, and we're not talking, and we were just, like, smoking weed or something. And I'm just, like, singing this song in my head, and then I, like, stop. And as soon as I stopped, like, in the lyric, my friend sang the rest of the lyrics out to me, like, right from where I left off. And I was like, are you in here? Like, that was so crazy.
It's brainwaves,
But we were
baby.
just linked. Yeah, it was just like this unspoken,
Yeah.
like, connection. It was like she was in my brain. It was so weird. And since then, I've, like, gotten really into tarot. And, like, I have a lot of, like, different synchronicities with doing tarot where I'm like,
You know, there are
This is real.
things that are known knowns, then there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And a lot of people, this is unknown unknown. For me, it's a known unknown that I know that there's something out there
yeah.
that people are not quantified, reading brain waves or things like that. But there's some connection. There is something.
Yeah.
I'm sure science will catch up someday.
I think it's starting to. I really think that, like, I don't know a lot of the studies on things like that. I know, like, of a few where they haven't been able to disprove a lot. And for me, that's kind of like a hint of, like, oh, well, you can't tell me I'm wrong, so. And, like, a lot of people will be like, well, I don't believe in astrology. Like, you're crazy. And I'm like, but you believe it's 3 p.m. Time is also made up. But we all live
Talk to
by
Albert
it.
Einstein. The space-time continuum.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, thank you very much.
Of course.
Liv,
Thank you for having me.
Nice evening conversation.